Sports Professor Rick Horrow, $1.3 trillion business of sports, CCON, Sports Innovation, Sports Entertainment Innovation Conference, over 100 speakers, 500 attendees, revolutionizes the thought leadership business of sports. We go mainstream, we go arguably more business-oriented and more profitable than mainstream. We go a combination of things, but we're talking about extreme, we're talking about wrestling, we're talking about a whole bunch of stuff with UFC and all other aspects of UFC. Lawrence Epstein, Senior Executive VP and Chief Operating Officer, UFC, responsible for all global business operations and managing the company's overall performance and growth. Pretty significant, can't get any better than that. Elevated UFC to unprecedented growth and popularity. 2010, negotiated the 10% sale of UFC to Abu Dhabi's own Flash Entertainment, and then the largest sale of a sports property in history for more than $4 billion to Endeavor at the time, and it continues to evolve. Lawrence will talk about a little more about the details of the evolution, obviously, as we get into this. Peter Dropick's EVP, Event Development and Operations for TKO, responsible for all aspects of staging the full schedule, more than 300 UFC and WWE live events, one of the strongest live event portfolios in sports entertainment. This role, I disagree, there can't be any stronger. I mean, that's got to be the biggest. President and CEO Dana White report a report to him. He reports to Dana White. He served as Executive VP, Event Development and Operations for the UFC, May 2024, responsible for strategic planning of UFC's 42-plus annual live events and more. And when you look at some of the stats, we did this panel basically last year and took the liberty of taking some of the stats from last year, and nearly a million television households, 975 plus reached by UFC programming, 40 plus live events, 283 million total followers among UFC total platforms, social platforms, 700 million UFC fans globally across 57 countries measured. I'm not going to continue that because those numbers are outdated, because they're last year's numbers, and anything older than last week's numbers are probably outdated. So let's get to it. First of all, both of you, when mixed martial arts was becoming mainstream and UFC was in its early days of rapid growth mode, how did you envision the sport to grow globally, and is it obviously measured up and exceeded expectations?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us here today. We appreciate it. We're really excited to be part of the entire CCON conference in its second year. Listen, when we bought the company in 2001, we knew this thing had global appeal. We felt like the entree, the understanding of the sport was something that people from all over the world can understand. You know, we always talk about how so many other sports are really difficult to understand, and the entree is difficult. You know, the NFL, for example, huge in the U.S., but if you weren't brought up with it, understanding four downs, punt, pass, kick, all this different stuff that happens, it's challenging. Cricket, on the other side, you know, it's a sport I've tried to understand for 20 years now. I still don't get it. The entree is difficult. You really, really got to invest some time, and you really got to be brought up in the tradition of cricket to truly understand and appreciate it. But our sport's easy. You put two athletes in an octagon, you let them use any martial art they want. It's easy to understand. The entree is easy to understand. Once you get into it, there's millions of layers of the onion to peel back and to get deeper into it. But because of the fact it was very, very accessible, we always knew this thing had global appeal. The other thing is, and Dana says it best, it doesn't matter, you know, what country you come from, you know, where you live, how you grew up. Everybody understands fighting. It's part of our DNA, and we get it, and we like it. And so there's this sort of part of us as human beings that sort of very quickly identify with combat sports. And so, you know, from day one, we felt like this thing had legs internationally. The question was, how are we going to do it? You know, when we bought the company, I think there was probably less than 12 countries that were broadcasting UFC events. So the game plan was, let's get out there, let's figure out a way to get it out there. And as we sit here today, you alluded to some of these stats, on TV in 175 countries and territories, reaching over 1 billion households with UFC content.
1 billion is a pretty good number. It's hard to beat, but this entity is going to beat it. Peter, the cheap joke would be you were at the Honda Center for so long, so were you used to fighting because of the Ducks, and now it was easy to do that. But we're not going to do that. When you made the transition here, did you ever think that it would become what it's become?
No. I think, when I had this, just a bit of background, when I was running events and working for an arena, had the opportunity to bring UFC to California. It was the first one when it was being legalized or sanctioned by the Athletic Commission. And, at the time I sat there and said, I'm hitting my ceiling, but here's a real opportunity. I believed in it, and I knew it was an emerging sport and sports league, but never thought we would be, in this position and in 1 billion households and, doing a fight on the lawn of the White House on the 250th anniversary of our country. So I never envisioned that by all means, but it's been an incredible opportunity to see the growth, not just here domestically, but internationally.
The strategy of aligning public and private stakeholders is easy in other sports. Not easy to implement, but easy to think about. That is the blueprint. How hard is it to generate public support now, both domestically and internationally?
It's a lot easier than it used to be. We took a look at, what I think is sort of the gold standard of sports organizations that partner with governments and tried to learn from what they did, and that's Formula One. They figured out a way to, bring these major events to cities around the world and get, of course, governments to pay them. And in order to do that, they had to create a value proposition. They had to show that what governments were investing in actually delivered for the objectives that those governments had. And so we studied what they had done, and it's all about, as you said in the question, aligning interests. One of the things that we do when we bring an event anywhere in the world is we create significant economic impact. And that economic impact is in the form of people traveling to those cities, those municipalities, those countries to witness our event. Typically, our fans come in for 3 or 4 days. They bring a lot of discretionary income with them. And we've been really, really good at documenting that, hiring experts to help us substantiate all of that. So that's really, really important to sort of aligning interests from an economic standpoint. The second thing that's really important is exposure. So many communities around the world, and this is where Formula One, sort of set the model. So many communities around the world want to get the word out about the great stuff going on in those communities. As I mentioned previously, every single UFC event reaches 1 billion homes around the world, broadcast in 175 plus territories around the world, broadcast in 50 plus languages around the world. So unlike a concert where a lot of people will show up and have a great time, the concert's not broadcast around the world. It's great for the 50,000 people that are coming to watch it at Allegiant Stadium, for example, but our events, sporting events, are broadcast around the world. And the cities and states and countries that host our events are part of the show. We integrate that into the show. So in addition to the economic impact of people coming in, watching the event, we are creating this massive promotional video for the communities that host our events. And that's really, really important to aligning our interests with those of the state actors.
We talked about that off air, so to speak, that the economic impact study is now a template for going to the governments and asking for some investment in some context, either promotional or tax dollars or subsidies or police protection or some other way. And clearly the return is going to be substantially more than that investment. That template is easier to put together now that you've been through it over the last few years?
Yeah, it's, as Lawrence mentioned, we initially hired groups to generate these economic impact studies, and it started right here in Las Vegas. And then, we started commissioning those in different states and then ultimately different countries. So now we have a portfolio of, different markets, different event types, to go out and use those as our, that's our sales pitch. Those are our marketing materials, and the data speaks for itself. We're, on a low end, our fights are generating $25 to $30 million in economic impact, and then the high end, it's $300 million. So those are real dollars, and the return is, at a minimum, probably 10 to 1. And you're seeing, states and countries now understand that a bit of investment is going to go a long ways. So it's not just the economic impact, it's the tax dollars, the direct tax dollars that are coming in, if that's sales tax or through athletic commissions or broadcast tax. It's job creation, 300-400 jobs are created on any given event. And then, all these mom and pop businesses are seeing the benefits from it. It's the restaurants, it's the bars, it's the stores, it's the hotels. So, you put all that on a piece of paper and it gets people's attention. They understand, that we spend a little bit, we're going to get a lot in return. On top of that, it's the exposure, as Lawrence mentioned. If tourism is, a key driver, and you want to tell the world that we want, more people to come, then we're the perfect platform.
And it is interesting that we follow this up before this with a lunch where two of the more dynamic public-private partnership-oriented cities, Vegas and Oklahoma City, have pushed their awareness to the point of everybody realizing who they are, and maybe they didn't as much before. Two different ways of approaching that from a city perspective, and now we have this from the event asset perspective as well. Sprinkle in the element of scarcity/leverage. One of the interesting things about major league mainstream expansion is you have 32, you're going to have 2 more. You're not going to have 5 more, you're going to have 2 more. You guys may be perceived as being able to create as many as you want. Does that impact negatively your sales pitch, or how do you deal with that leverage issue?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you talk about, what creates differentiation, and, in the world that we live in today, there's so much that's become commoditized. You have the same restaurants chains, you've got the same retail locations. In the casino business, it used to be only Las Vegas, then it was Atlantic City. Now you have gambling everywhere. You've got the same slot machines, you've got the same FanDuel accounts. So what's the differentiator? Why are people going to come to Las Vegas when all the things that, I just mentioned are present probably within a couple hour, drive for them, if not less? It's events. It's events, it's events, it's events. It's entertainment, and of course it's sports. And that scarcity factor is really, really important. We do 42 UFC events per year. Pete handles all scheduling and all event operations. I don't think he wants to do anymore, so we're probably not going to do much more than...
You mean your leverage is determined by his workload? Is that the way that works?
Pete manages the schedule and the operations. If he's negative on it, we're not going to do it. We might expand a little bit, but the bottom line is we're not going to do 200 UFC events or 100 UFC events. We might expand a bit on the margin, but at the end of the day, 42 events is a very limited amount. Those events are very, very precious, and it gives us an incredible negotiating leverage when we're talking to a state or a tourism authority or a municipality about, hey, we've only got 42. We're going to do a certain number in these markets that we do every year. So there's a precious few. If you want to step up and partner with us on these events, we're going to deliver for you. But it gives us a really, really good negotiating position.
Yeah, just to add to that, if 42 may seem, it's almost one a weekend, but, we're doing, call it 18 of those internationally. So if you're just looking at it from a domestic standpoint, you're almost cutting it in half. And then we do a handful in Vegas, so you take that out of the equation. And the other piece is on the bigger events, but the other piece is we have the Apex facility, which is our own smaller facility, which we started doing closed events in during during the pandemic. But we realized, there's a massive cost savings, and we keep about 1 a month there. So all of a sudden, there's not a lot to go around, especially our pay-per-view, our top premium product. So all of a sudden, we're shopping 4 events a year. Yeah. So when you look at it, it's 42. Yeah, it's not a lot, but you really whittle it down, it's only a handful of events that are available. So holding events at Apex we didn't realize the byproduct of that would be that it created more scarcity of events on the road. So it is, only 12 of the 42 are the premium product, which is what obviously everyone wants.
I can see the Vegas Sun Review or whatever it's called now. NBA refuses to expand to Vegas, Adam Silver's workload too great. Kidding? Yeah. Just kidding, ladies and gentlemen. You got to create some artificial scarcity, and it's not artificial. In your case, it's real. The perspective on your economic impact tails and how you convince governments. Look, awareness, we just had the mayor of Oklahoma City talk about what the Thunder Championship meant. We have Steve Hill from the Convention and Visitor Bureau talk about it from here. How do you quantify something that is visceral and inherently difficult to quantify, but yet really important?
Well, there's a lot of data out there that we get from a variety of sources, but of course, the most obvious, we've got information with respect to television ratings and how many people are viewing our events. But the biggest driver for us when it comes to exposure is social media. And, we're lucky enough to have one of the great innovators in the space, Dana White, at the company, leading us. He's just become this social media juggernaut. And it's not just him. He's put together a network of influencers that will talk about our events, that will promote our events, that will create interest in our events. I mean, take a look at the people that Dana is associating with right now. And I'm only going to grab a few of them, but these are pretty big names. I'll grab one that's very big,
Right, yeah.
the President of the United
Yeah,
States, Donald Trump. But then sprinkle on a little Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta. Then throw in, all of the celebrities and musicians and athletes that are, part of Dana's network. In addition to these influencers, people like the Nelk Boys that, have connected with young men like nobody else in America and, frankly, around the English-speaking world. You put that all together, and you've got this incredible promotional exposure ecosystem that, creates a lot of data, and it shows the value of what we're delivering when the UFC comes to town.
Peter told me off air that the White House cage match will be in the Oval Office. Is that correct?
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, it might be. He's no. By the way, he's not listening to me anymore. Quite clearly, he's not. So the role of celebrity fighters in your world, not just lining up government and cultural support, but lining up marketing advantages. Duplessis in South Africa and Tapuria in Spain and Georgia, etc. How do the names of these cultural local superstars affect the marketability of this?
Yeah.
Go. Anybody.
Listen, it obviously is a significant asset. I mean, it's interesting, and Dana talks about this all the time. Like, for whatever reason, politicians and leaders in government are interested in the baddest men or women on the planet. They're interested in it for some reason. I mean, when Khabib Nurmagomedov won the title and beat, Conor McGregor, who was the first person that called him? Might not be a name we want to talk about, but it's Vladimir Putin. I mean, so the president of a pretty significant country is very much interested in what was happening with the world of UFC. I mean, we were just in Baku, Azerbaijan. Pete and I were there just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a great event in Baku, which is a beautiful city on the Caspian Sea. And Friday before the event, we were asked to meet with the president of the country. We went by the presidential palace. We had a nice meeting with him. Incredibly interested in Azerbaijani fighters, in the UFC coming to his country, and so there's always been this affinity between government leaders and athletes, in particular combat sports athletes, and it's really been very helpful to us in us growing the business.
Yeah, and specifically to some of these athletes you mentioned, the answer is when they start winning, our phone starts ringing.
Yeah.
And they see, these athletes, Ilia Topuria, for example, he hangs out with the football stars at Real Madrid. He's as big a star as they are. So, that gets everyone's attention. And so it makes the job easier and harder because, everyone's saying they, bring the fight here, which it's nice to be loved. But yes, when we have champions from these different countries, it makes it a lot easier. And, the inbound calls are quick after that belt's put on them. And we manage that almost every event.
Broader question, not just public-private partnership piece, but logistics, putting on events as well. Baku's a good example. I know they worked hard to get the Asian Games and some of the other mega sports that make a statement, F1, et cetera. And I just, parenthetically, it's not, I don't need to give you my travel schedule, but I spent some time speaking in Tashkent last year, and they're all excited about doing some stuff there, too. The question I've got is whether or not those places that are far off from us are harder to fund and put on events because they're not used to the infrastructure, et cetera, or are they easier because they want it badly?
It's probably both. You know, I think when we identify a market that's either an inbound call or we're seeing that's emerging market with athletes, or you know there's a new media deal on the, coming up and we want to be there as a use it as a marketing tool, we do a full market assessment and determine what is available in the market, what the infrastructure looks like, what the equipment availability is. Do we have to fly stuff in? Do we have to ship it in? And then we do a full assessment to understand how that impacts the P&L. And that's part of, we use that to then go negotiate and say, okay, this event in this country is going to cost, $5 million, incremental to a normal event.
Right.
So that gets factored into the conversation when we're looking for funding. So, yeah, does it help when they're calling us? Absolutely, because they're more motivated. Some markets have very modern arenas and have a ton of production equipment, et cetera, that we need, and it makes it easier, and others don't. So it's just a bit of a give and take, but yeah, it's absolutely something we deal with quite often, including Azerbaijan and the Middle East, and the list goes on.
List goes on. A question for the operational guy, just hypothetically. So it's going to cost you $5 million more incrementally, and it's a not dicey, but it's just an unproven venue. But you found, because of government, et cetera, $7 million that you didn't have before. Where is the trade-off between making a little more money and being safe? And this is a very important answer from a management perspective. You got to get them to listen to this answer very carefully.
Number one, we're always going to be safe. We're never putting the staff, athletes, fans, et cetera, in harm's way. It doesn't matter how much money it is. That's the short answer. But there's a balance, because a lot of these markets don't have the proper venues. We've struggled. A good example is, Brazil's a really, really important market to us. Obviously, from a talent athlete standpoint, from a fan base standpoint, and it's one of our top markets. They lack quality venues, and the venues they do have are just going downhill. So there's been times we recently said we're not going to a certain market because the venue's just not meeting our standards anymore. So it doesn't matter how much money they're going to provide. Now, if the money they're providing helps us put the right measures in place or bring the right equipment in so we're creating a safe environment and the production is to our standards, then of course it's going to work. But no, it doesn't. We don't just take the money and go.
That's a really important point on the production front, because it doesn't matter where the event's taking place anywhere in the world. We hold ourselves to the same production standards for every single event. So if we can't deliver world-class production level events from wherever we're doing it, that's just a no. I don't care how much anyone pays, because at the end of the day, we have to deliver that high-quality content, and it's got to be consistent across all 42 events.
And I assume you don't want to be the poster child for a country attempting to improve its infrastructure, maybe doing it, maybe not. Parenthetically, this is not a panel on world development of Olympics or not, but aren't we all kind of a little upset that Brazil didn't take advantage of their Olympic opportunity better? Their golf course is in ill repute, and their arenas are terrible, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'll give you an example. I won't name the country, but you named one of the athletes from the country earlier.
They were trying to pitch us on bringing an event. They don't have the proper arenas, but they said they have a stadium, and they said, if we come, the stadium's open. We don't do outdoor stadiums. They said they'll cover it
With a blanket or what?
A tarp.
Nice. Congratulations.
And
how did you say no immediately, or did you wait?
I asked a little more detail on the tarp just to get a bit of a chuckle.
Some fun,
but they were serious, and we said, this tarp probably isn't going to cut it. They were thinking from a weather standpoint. The list goes on, but Yeah, those are some of the conversations.
But I mean,
we
the
have.
good news is in certain markets, we've really been instrumental in helping some of these markets develop high quality arenas that we ultimately went to. There's a variety of examples I could give you where we worked with local sports organizations, municipalities, et cetera, to help them develop the quality of arena that we'd ultimately do an event there, and we did them.
My comment was going to be that if you look at Oakview or AEG or some of the other entities, you perform even more of a valuable service because you got the major act that will hopefully improve a facility as a consequence of attracting that act.
Yeah, and we do have those conversations in, a lot of, as Lauren said, there are, cities and countries, they'll come to us asking us, hey, we're looking at building an arena. If we do build the proper arena, would you come? And we say typically yes. And would you help us design it? We need your expertise. What do we need to put into place from a structure standpoint, production standpoint, technology standpoint, et cetera, so that you would come and others will come? So we don't just look at ourselves, we make it broad enough so that they can attract more business. So that's the best model. But to say, hey, we'll build this, will you come? That typically doesn't work out.
Well,
it's got to be a long-term.
Yeah.
It's got to be a long-term plan.
And by the way, it doesn't work anywhere, so it's not as if you guys are out front on the mistake. So let's segue from arena development and facility leverage to media, social media, new media as well. Your growth strategy, I assume, is both traditional media, let's call it that, small t for now, and a prolific reliance on social media as well. What's the kind of split?
Yeah, listen, it's all about, an appropriate balance. I mean, clearly, in order to fund your operations, you've got to sell your content. It's the number one source of revenue for us is content sales. So, and that content, those type of revenues generally come from, the typical streamers or, linear broadcast partners that are broadcasting, all sorts of sports content. What's interesting is how you think about the other important revenue sources for us, which are sponsorship partnerships and, of course, ticket sales to events. And how does that interplay with what you're doing with your, sort of traditional media distribution? Because it's all connected. If you're on a broader reach platform, guess what? You're probably going to have better partnership, sponsorship type opportunities than if you are on sort of a subscription, less distributed type platform. So, at the end of the day, these things are all, all connected. But, listen, media is and continues to be for sports the number one source of revenue.
Would you get a sense that as far as media is concerned, the mainstream product doesn't evolve, and it's a little bit, and there's not this tremendous incremental awareness where a large segment of the population may not have known your sport 5 years ago and know it today. Does that dynamic change the media relationships, the way you approach media, or is that just one of the factors that you look at and you move on?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for different things depending on where we are in the life cycle of developing our brand in a particular market. I mean, the good news is that, virtually everywhere in the world now, people know what UFC is. That wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago when we were doing media deals. So back in those periods of time, we might have said, you know what, we're interested in taking less money to get on a more broadly distributed platform because we want to expose people to the product. They watch the product. We think the product's great. If they see it, they're going to like it. They're going to become fans. Now as we fast forward to 2025 and we're in the middle of our media rights negotiations right now, the life cycle of the business, particularly in the United States, is very different than it was a generation or so ago. And so our objectives, are different. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, there still is this relationship between broad reach and monetizing other things like sponsorship and partnerships that you've just got to think about as you navigate the world of media. But at the end of the day, it's like everything else in life. It's all about balance.
Yeah, and so you're in the middle of it now. Who's it going to be? How long is it going to be? When are you going to announce it?
Well, I mean, listen, our media rights here in the United States expire at the end of the year, so definitely before January 1st, 2026. I can give you that. We're in the middle of it right now, and, there's a lot of interest, so hopefully we'll have something to talk about in the relatively near future, but certainly before the end of the year.
That's one of the best non-answers I've ever heard from a commissioner-oriented person that I've in life. Excuse me. Of a public company. We're right. That's really important. In the context of overall strategy at 30,000 feet, it is clear that you look at some of the mainstream sports, and they go back to the old reliables, but they always hold out, let's call it an Amazon or a Google or some piece that will be special, and it'll drive up the rights from the other traditional carriers. Are you mature enough to follow that strategy? Is it even appropriate for us to be discussing negotiating strategy, or how do you approach these negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, just macro, discussion about this. I mean, at the end of the day, like the streaming platforms are in sports already. Amazon obviously has an NFL package. Netflix has done a deal with our brother sister company WWE, which has been transformative for their business. And the list goes on and on. I mean, even the ESPNs of the world, which you might think of as a traditional media company with linear broadcast platforms, has ESPN Plus, which of course we helped them build, and now they're launching whatever they're calling it, ESPN direct to consumer. So everybody's sort of in the world of streaming at some level with respect to sports. And there's a reason for that, because it worked, because sports are special, because just like the stuff we were talking about with respect to why are governments and tourism authorities excited about, paying for these major events to come, it's the same story with respect to the major media companies. Sports continues to work, and Mark Shapiro, our president at TKO, he says it better than anybody. It's like sports rights never get cold. They get hot, they get super hot, they're on fire, but they're never cold.
And sports rights never lends itself to reruns, and it's always appointment TV and all those cliches. The interesting thing I learned from my buddy, Mark Lazarus, way back when, and he learned it from the knee of Dick Ebersol, et cetera, is storytelling, storytelling, storytelling. I assume in your sport people want to see the results, but they also are particularly interested in the characters and the character of these athletes. Yes?
100%. I mean, I mentioned
you're
Dana
not
previously, but we got the best storyteller in the business and the best promoter in the business with Dana. We also have an incredible production team, led by Craig Borsari, just won another Emmy Award, Sports Emmy Award for our Sphere show. And it is all about storytelling. It's all about, explaining to people, why they should be interested in the personalities and the people behind the actual events themselves. Listen, our product is awesome. You don't have to get into the stories, but having the stories behind the athletes just makes it so much better. And, at the end of the day, that's what gets people to come back time and time again, are these exciting, interesting stories about what lead up to and become an integral part of the sporting events themselves.
I was going to say, it's not just about the athletes, too. I think the brand and the live events, we create stories around those. If you go back, to the pandemic, we created Fight Island, and that was a story in itself. We're going to follow, Fight Island. Was it on a remote island? No, not exactly, but
Is that a secret? Do we not know it's on a
some
remote
people
island?
thought, oh my God, you're taking over a remote island. It's like that was a story. That was Dana being the promoter.
Right.
And then Lawrence mentioned the Sphere event. We were the first live sporting events to go there, winning awards and Emmys for that. That was it was a must-see moment. We got to see the Sphere event. Probably weren't watching some of the athletes or following some of the athletes. And then we just had the President of the United States announce that we're doing a fight at the White House.
In the Oval Office.
And there's another story. So, there's these moments throughout the company's history where it may not just be about the athlete, well, that's important, but it's about the evolution of the company, and those are some key moments.
Two more, and for both of you. So either, and then both. The old days, how do you define the glory days, the old days? You look back and you see not too far long ago when you weren't mainstream. Not only weren't you mainstream, but people didn't want to do anything related to you. And then about maybe 10 years before, you see the Haystack Calhouns and all the stuff that was happening on a regional basis in the old traditional days of wrestling, capital W, small W. Do you see those as different days, different sports, or just kind of an evolution of where the business is now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural evolution. I think there were, so many misconceptions, misunderstandings about what UFC, for example, was, who our athletes were as people, what the sport was all about, injury rates, all this different stuff. And so I think, you were living in a world where disinformation was sort of, ruling the day in many places. The sport was banned in certain places. So, it certainly took us a fair amount of time to educate people and rip away and just get rid of all those misconceptions and misunderstandings. But at the end of the day, where we've evolved today is clearly, where we've always dreamed we would be. This deal that we did with the Walt Disney Company and ESPN was a truly transformative moment in the history of the company. We're about to do another, major media deal that will also be, incredibly transformative to our business. But, at the end of the day, as I mentioned previously, all these businesses have life cycles, evolutions. We're at an incredibly interesting point right now, and I keep going back to it. But I mean, who ever thought we would have a fight at the White House? This is just, it's just another milestone that seemed completely incredible and impossible just a few years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And here we are, less than a year away from that happening.
It would have been nice if he informed you about it before he made the announcement, but that's another story. So another story. Your perspective on my question about the old days.
Yeah, Lawrence and I started about the same time, and I think we were doing 11, 12 events, and we were probably 30, 35, employees at the time, and it was, while that's changed to 42 events, global global events, I don't know, 500-ish employees. I don't know the exact number anymore.
About 540.
Okay, yeah, around the world. And, billion households, et cetera. I think from an operation, for how we manage and how we, operate day to day, a lot of it's the same. It's a pretty, while we're part of a public company and there's more layers involved and, we have sister properties, it's, I think, Lawrence would agree. There's a small group and we're pretty nimble, and, it's one of the reasons we're successful and we can move so fast that, decisions are made pretty quickly, and that hasn't changed. The number of people may be involved or the actual people involved, but Dana's at the helm of it, and there's a group of people around him that can move pretty quick, and that hasn't changed since
And one thing I'm fearful that if it ever does change, won't be good for us, and that's this chip on our shoulder that we've had from day one. We've gotten to be this big company that's mainstream and all this stuff. We still have that chip on our shoulder. We're still fighting to be talked about alongside the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NHL, et cetera. And we got to keep that chip because that's what drives us every single day.
And that stems from being told no. And the states are saying no. The media companies are saying no. The advertisers are saying no. That's not an answer in our office when we try to do something. If the answer is no, we can't do that, you'll get a death stare from Dana. Like, he'll look right through you, like, that you seriously saying that. That's why we're so good at what we can do, and that's why you can create Fight Island. That's why we can figure out how to do an event in the Sphere. That's why we're going to figure out how to do an event at the White House. It's like, that's the mindset. We can pretty much accomplish anything, but that's from being told no.
But I also think one of the side advantages, I guess, of being a public company is your shareholders aren't going to allow you to forget that chip. Right? I mean, hopefully. So you first, and then Lawrence gets the last word. Where's the company, and where are you 10 years from now?
Great question. I mean, I think we continue to, from a live event standpoint, Dana says every day we're going to go everywhere, and we're going to continue chipping away at everywhere. We just did an event in Azerbaijan, and we're going just announced an event. We're going to Qatar later in the year. So live events, I think we continue to bring events to all these countries we haven't been to. What that experience looks like, I think will continue to evolve. We'll see a lot more. Is it the Sphere? No. Is it something, inches closer to that? I think there'll be a bit more immersive experience. So the live event experience will be enhanced a bit more. But there's a ton of opportunity to continue to grow the brand around the world.
Last word, Lawrence Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, we have 8 brand maxims for the 8 sides of the octagon at the UFC, and one of them, which I like to talk about a lot, is be first. We love being first. First sport to come back during COVID. First sport to do so many different things, and I think that's what you're going to continue to see out of us 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, is that mantra and delivering, those first experiences. Pete alluded to technology. We've got a relationship with Meta. And you're going to see a lot of firsts in the world of sports when it comes to us leaning in heavily on technology, different types of immersive experiences, both in the live event at the arena, but also as you watch the event from your home. So continue to look for us to be first in a lot of different areas.
Thank you all. We have a special wrap-up comment from Mr. Sean Garrity.
First of all, storytelling's everything. We're very grateful to these 2 amazing individuals, and they don't want the accolades or the recognition, but these are our mentors. This is where CCON comes from. Lawrence, Peter, Jay Vickers. It was inspired that Las Vegas, UNLV, the world wants something like this. So for all of you here, thank you. But the mentorship, the shaping, we aspire to follow the trajectory that you've laid out for us. So very grateful to you, and thank you.
Thank you all for your expertise and vision, and thanks for the panel. See you all next time. Thank you.